Hello and welcome to part 3 of half bath to full bath. I'm How To Bob, and before we get started with this part, I want to go over some walls and how we removed and how we decided what was load bearing and what wasn't. You can see I got a mock layout of the house right here, and we'll get rid of the first floor and we'll take a look down in the basement. And you can see there's a little piece of wall in the back, but that is not a load bearing wall. The joists for this house are running from side to side, so they're running from here over to the other side like so. The total width of the house is 18 feet, so we can span that distance. And if there was a load bearing wall, it would be running perpendicular like so to the floor joists, and the floor joist would rest upon that. Now we'll go back upstairs and we'll look. There is nothing across the whole entire front from side to side of the house. And once again, we'll go back into the basement and you can see the joist run from the left side of the house all the way over to the right side of the house with no support. So we can remove any of the walls upstairs and they will not be load bearing. So that's how we determined that these walls that were removed were not load bearing. Now we can go back up to the bathroom area and begin the process again of stripping out some 2x4s. And again, we have wires running through the 2x4s that'll need to be cut out right here. So I'll get my reciprocating saw and I'll just cut some slots here and remove the wire that way. And you can see the duct here is running up and over that little void area, or the build down area that was in the way. It's going to have to be moved. I have to move the vent over a couple of feet to expand the bathroom. So I'll remove all the screws holding the vents together, and then I can slide my vent apart like so, and then I can remove the whole ductwork system from what's left of the support here. All right. Then I'm going to go down into the basement and disconnect my ductwork in the basement and come back up, and I can remove the whole vent going up to the second story. And I'm going to get this top piece out of the way now so I can work. I'll have to cut these nails. I'm going to need to reroute the ductwork, and I'm going to keep it in between the floors so that I don't have any drop downs in my ceiling. And again, I've got these wires that are running through the 2x4, so I'll have to cut those off. And this one's a little tight here to the electrical, so I'm just going to cut it from the outside and then hit it with a hammer and knock that little plug out. And that works pretty good to get the wire out of the way. Now I can remove that 2x4, and I'm going to put the wire here out of the way and just keep stripping things out. And you can see the old placement of the ductwork, and this is where I'm going to lay out the wall. So I want to run square with the living room wall, and I'll draw my line. This is about where my new wall is going to be located. I'll go 3.5 inches over and draw another line. So that's the location of my wall. Then I can run my square over and get my dimension for the new hole for my vent. Once I get that marked, I'll get the circular saw and I'll plunge cut right down into the floor and cut out my hole for the new ductwork. Okay, one more cut and I have my floor cut. I should be able to pull that piece right out. Here it comes. And I'll save that piece to fill in the old spot here. So now I'm going to go down to the basement again and start removing some of this old ductwork. It's got a lot of duct tape on it, so get that out of the way, and then I can remove all the screws that are holding it together and slide the ductwork apart. You can see the new location That's what I'm shooting for right there. And the old location was here. So just take the same piece of ductwork and reverse the angle and slide it into place. And then I'll connect it back to the system. Slide it together. Once I get it slid together, make sure it's nice and tight, and then I will screw it back together. And once I get everything screwed together, I like to use this aluminum type foil tape just to seal off all the seams. I go around all the seams regardless if they're screwed together or not. So now I can pull my vent up as far as it'll go, and I'll know how much I have to work with here. And I can fill in my old hole now. So I'm going to put a couple of screws in, get them started. And I've got a little piece of patch OSB here. I'll just slide that in and screw that to the floor in a couple different spots. Now the other piece is not going to fit, so you guessed it, I'm going to have to go back down to the basement. And I got my patch piece here for the other side. Slide that into place, and I'll screw it in from the basement just to hold it in place. Then I can come back upstairs and screw it down securely to the subfloor. Put a few screws in. Once I get all the screws in there, I'll take my piece and put it in place and screw it into place. Now this is going to be covered by some Wonderboard or Durock or Hardy board, so it's not really that big a deal. It's not going to support too awful much. No big deal. So I can put my vent back on to see where it's going to land, and I want to screw that into place. I'll put a few screws in this thing just to make sure that it stays put. And once I get all the screws tightened up, we can see what we have going up against the ceiling here. It's off a little bit. I'm going to use the same duct piece here, so I'll just slide that in here. And you can tell that it's not going to line up because I want this wall to be as plumb as possible, and it's off to the side a little bit. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of work. So I'll run my level up there, and it looks like I need a couple inches extension. So I'll take an old piece of ductwork here, take it apart, make it flat, and then mark it where I want my distance to be extended. And then I'll cut that little piece, put it back together, and that gives me a nice little collar to extend my ductwork just a couple inches there. So I'll slide that into place. I like to tap it in with a hammer, make sure it's nice and tight before I put it all together. And that should get me right in line with my ductwork. So now that I'm in line, I'll go ahead and screw this into place in a couple spots. And once I get the screws put in, again, I'll come back and put some duct tape, foil tape over top of the seams just to seal everything off. I've got to extend my ductwork up, so I'm going to take a few measurements. Looks like 3.5 by 10, and I'm going to need to raise it. Let's just cut it right at 10 inches. So I've got a piece of sheet metal. I'm going to lay that out. First, I'll cut it at 10 inches. Snip the whole piece of sheet metal down. I don't have access to that kind of ductwork, but I do have a piece of sheet metal, and it'll be fairly easy to make. So I start laying out my piece with the 3.5, and then I'll lay it out over to the 10-inch mark. Then I'll lay it out again, 3.5, and then another 10-inch piece. This is going to be extra. And I'll take two 2x4s, sandwich them together, screw them tightly together on either side of the sheet metal, and then take another 2x4 and kind of fold the sheet metal over, and that'll give me a nice solid crease. It's kind of like using a bending brake, which Unfortunately, I don't have with me at the time, so this is my makeshift way of doing that. And then I can unscrew the 2x4s, and it gives me a pretty decent angle there. I can bend it a little bit more to get it right at a 90. But then I just go to the next line, stack my 2x4s together right on the line. This way takes a little longer, but overall takes less time for such a small bend than going and getting the brake press, the bending brake. Again, I'll just take another 2x4, increase the sheet metal, and I get a pretty good bend on it that way. And I can take my 2x4s apart and just continue around my marks that I've made. And it comes up with a fairly decent piece of ductwork when I get finished. So I've got one more bend here at 3.5. And I just push that over again and take my 2x4s apart. And I've got one more bend to do here. Sandwich my 2x4s together. Make sure the line is lined up with my 2x4s and sandwich it tight and bend my last bend over. And that should get me a nice 10-inch piece of ductwork that's 3.5 by 10 inches, which will line up perfectly with what I've got in the wall there. So you can see I have a little extra piece on the end that I need to cut off. So once I get the excess piece cut off, I can get a couple screws and screw my piece of ductwork together. And there we go. Got a nice piece of ductwork now. So now I'm going to cut a couple relief cuts in this, about 1 inch long. Just helps me fit this piece of ductwork over top of the other one or underneath the other one, whichever way it works best. And you can see I'm going to have to jaunt it over to the side here. It's not exactly lined up, so I'm going to set it in the bottom and then draw a line where I need to line it up with the other piece. Now I extend this out a little bit further than the line I drew, but that line's going to give me the template to where I need to cut, and I need to leave a little extra, so I will cut along the line, but on the long side of the line to give me a little extra venting, a little extra length. And I should probably give the word of warning, you should be wearing gloves if you're doing any work with vent work or steel or sheet metal. It is very sharp in places. I'm going to be very careful, and I'll try to make it through this without the gloves. So now that I have my angles cut, I'm going to cut a couple of relief cuts here on each side, the part that I removed, just to make it easier to put the vent on. Okay, now I can slide the new piece of ductwork extension on the bottom and align it up with the top best as I can. Once I get it lined up, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of screws in there just to hold it into place. And I want to bend this little tab over just to make everything seal off as best as it can. And I'll continue going around putting in a couple of screws here and a couple of screws there. And once I'm done putting in all the screws I want to put in, I'll get my foil tape and wrap all the seams just to make sure everything's sealed off and we get good pressure through our venting system. And I can't forget the lower part down at the floor. I need to get some foil tape down there. Maybe a little overkill, but hey, it's not a bad idea. So now I'm going to take my square and line it up with my ductwork, and that's where the wall is going to be located. So I'll extend that line over by drawing a line. Right here it should be perpendicular with the living room wall, and then I can go over 3.5 inches, and that's where my top plate's going to be. So I'll cut the drywall out using my oscillating tool to make room for my 2x4. Once I get the drywall cut, you can see it pulls out really nice. Gives me a nice clean cut, and this should get me pretty close. I'll check it for plumb once I get the wall put together. So I'm going to start putting the base plates on, and I'm going to use construction screws. You could use nails for this, but I happen to have some construction screws and I don't have my nailer with me today. So I'm going to put another sill plate or base plate over here, and I'll use my level just to keep it in line with the other base plate. And I'll start putting some screws in until it's secure. Once I get my base plates all screwed in, I'm going to turn the corner with a wall stud, and I can screw that into the existing wall stud that I put in earlier, just to hold it in place a couple of places, and then I'll toenail it into the top plate, and finally toenail it into the bottom plate to make it nice and secure. Next, I'm going to put a top plate in for the rest of the wall here, and there's plenty of places to screw this in since I put that brace in. So I can screw that into place and then continue putting wall studs in place. I want to get this one as close as I can to the ductwork. That'll give drywall the most support it can as it spans the ductwork. I'm not too much worried about doing 16 on center, since this is going to be less than 16 inches. I'll just have to mark where my studs are located. But I'll toenail this stud into the base plate and then toenail it into the top plate once I get it plumb. Looks like it's pretty close to the top plate, so I'm good there. So now I have to add another top plate, and I'm going to mark the ceiling, little hash marks where the joists are, because that's where I'm going to screw the top plate in. It just helps when I put my top plate in to know where it is. I'll use my rafter square to get it as square as possible with the existing wall, and then screw it in. Okay, now that I have that top plate in, I can start putting more studs up, and I want to keep this one again close to the duct as possible so I don't have to span so far with drywall. But the little angled part at the top will keep me away at the bottom. So I'll still keep it as close as I can at the top and still keep this plumb. So I've got the bottom toe nailed in, make sure it's plumb. And then I can secure it to the top by toenailing it in. So if you like this video, make sure you hit that bell icon down there to see all future updates. I'm How To Bob, and as always, thanks for watching.